Hey guys, thanks for having a look and joining us for this quick video. And this is a kind of how-to on the disassembly and some tips on the reassembly of how to get a track off a Polaris Axis or Matryx chassis. I mean, really, this is the way to do it for either one of these. And the reality is, I mean, the steps that you go through, they would also work for a number of other sleds. The concept is nearly exactly the same. I guess I'll begin by mentioning, or I guess suggesting, that whenever I first started snowmobiling a number of years ago, I asked some friends that had been snowmobiling for quite some time how often I should replace the track, and they told me, you'll never go through a track. And so my assumptions in my first number of sleds is that that was going to be true. And unfortunately, as you're going to be able to see here in some of these pictures, that's not true. There's a number of reasons why to replace a track, but I will say, first and foremost, the number one reason to replace a track is for safety reasons. And there's a number of things that can go wrong with a track that will cause a safety issue. If you're missing too many clips, that track is going to wear prematurely. If you get any big tears in that track that are going to be going over where the drive gear goes, inside those little holes in the track, that's going to be a big issue. If you have studs that are pulling through or studs that are breaking through your track, it's going to weaken it. And if you have portions of that track that are breaking or tearing off, ripping off, as we have a number of pictures here, obviously you get to a point where you need to replace that track. Now for us, we've used a couple of different things. I mean, a number of different groups have mentioned using shoe goo. We used that. We used, I think it was E6000, this other kind of little, call it glue, and look, they work for a little bit and it'll get you through in a bind. You'll see here in this video we actually used it for 1,400 miles until our track came in. But the number one thing I will tell you to look out for is once this track gets weakened or you have issues, it will eventually come apart. And it doesn't always come apart at a slow speed. Generally speaking, it comes apart at a very high speed. And when it comes apart, as you can see here with us, with our kind of track pics along the way, is that it comes apart over 100 miles an hour and you have no acceleration, but you also have no brake. You really don't have much control of your sled. So this is something to be aware of, and so always inspect your track. You can see here that I'm replacing this track at less than or just about 6,500 miles, which might seem premature, but we already had a number of tears in it. We had a number of rips. We had a number of lugs that were missing. I was already missing some clips, and this is something that I'm just not willing to roll the dice with. I've been down the trail before at over 100 miles an hour and lost, obviously, a track and lost a good bit of control, and thank goodness I was able to bring it to a stop. Hope you enjoyed this video. I pieced together a number of different quick sessions for you to take a look at. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments below. Thanks, guys.
Well, I guess at first sight, this was a pretty good looking track. You can see overall would be the driver's side or the PTO side. The majority of these lugs were in good shape, no tears, no issues whatsoever. And I don't know why, but over on the other side of the machine, we ended up with some more issues on this track. And so what you'll see is about every third lug gets ripped off. So you have this one here, that one's fine, although it does have a small rip in it. You can see a small rip there. Third lug down, ripped off. By the way, this one you can see was, we put some glue on that glue got ripped off. This glue got ripped off. Another split, that glue stayed. Split, that glue stayed. That glue stayed. This glue stayed from the last ride. But it's really bizarre to us because it's every third that lug got ripped off. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's every third lug got ripped off. And what's interesting about that is that one can say, oh, that might be the manufacturer, but that lug design is the one that is this one here, how that goes across. So there's also a design difference for that lug, and that's the one that we're seeing, that would actually be the counterpart is this one, that is getting ripped off on the outside. So maybe there's something to do with that particular design or how that one contacts the snow but essentially those are the ones that were coming off this track. The other thing that we had on this was, it wasn't a pull through, and had one missing stud that we replaced there along the way. And really this glue that we used, we utilized it to get us through the last 1,400 miles because we were waiting to get this track in. But that's it, this track's off and we're ready to go. All right, today we're going to be taking off the track. And here's our track here. I'm going to be replacing this with a new track. We had a couple of rip components, we'll look at that later. Let's go ahead and get into it. Well, with the hood off and the fenders off, we'll go ahead and remove. Obviously, you can leave that if you want, but you can make a little space here. Ultimately, at the same time, we're going to go ahead and change the chain case fluid, clean it up, and then deal with the chain case tensioner down there. So in order to access that, we'll take out the exhaust. This will come out. Really, we have a couple of springs there. That, by the way, is my modification. There's one spring underneath, one spring here, and one spring on the back there. Once you do that, this whole system will come out. Now the muffler's out of the way, I just kind of usually roll it over here and set it up on top of the exhaust. It's not going anywhere. If that makes you uncomfortable, of course, because of this sensor, you can always just take off that sensor, and it's probably the safer way to do it, but I always kind of do it this way. Now from here, on this side, there's a bolt here on the caliper. There's also a bolt on the back of this caliper. And we'll ultimately have to get this loose. So sometimes it's better to leave that in there, get this loose first, get that broke free, because you can use your brake then, pull it off. Then we'll go after this caliper and get that out of the way. And ultimately we'll also have to loosen up this, but we can deal with that later, get after this chain case. In here, we have this guy here. There's this one little, these little quick tabs, one there. And this is just to be able to peel this back and get a little bit more room in this Torx here.
Guys, I can't stress enough how complicated or difficult this, kind of if you're facing a caliper, the left-hand rear, it's a left-hand 15 millimeter, it's a 15 millimeters on the left-hand side behind the caliper, how difficult it is to get out. But do know this, if you have a kind of a 12-point socket and you have a 3/8 drive, you can get on that and slowly get that bolt to come out. I've been able to do this over a number of years with different sleds that are Polaris's. And then, as you're starting to get that bolt out, make sure that you get the socket and ratchet out of the way so you don't have a clearance issue.
Well, once that bolt is broke loose, then you go after those two 15 millimeters that are kind of complicated to get to on the back side of that. You can see one is back here, right there. And then in order to get the caliper out, there's not much clearance, you actually pull the pads, and it gives it enough room to get out of there. And you start pulling off your disc, and making some space over here. From here, you can see there's a couple of bolts we eventually have to get to on the chain case cover and slide that off. And then you see there's a spacer here. We don't want to lose that, obviously. Now on this side, we're going to go ahead and take off that secondary so we can get the ability to get that shaft moving out of there, which would be nice. And then we'll go after the drive shaft.
I can't really stress how important it is to make sure you understand for every one of these bolts you pull out, whether, and look, you have them on the brake caliper and you have them here on the secondary. As you pull these out, there are spacers. You can see the washers that are there. You need to make sure you don't lose the order of those spacers. And one little trick I usually do, if I pull them out and see them like this, I'll put a little zip tie on it. You can tape the bolt. Do it any way you want, but that's just a trick that I found. A zip tie usually works perfectly well and holds it well enough. Also, you'll see here that there will be other spacers that aren't on the, on the front side of that secondary. They're also on the back side of that secondary. I like to take a picture of them along the way so I always remember what I had there, and sometimes they even fall out. They'll stick to the secondary, they'll fall out, so be careful of losing those. And finally, as you can see on the drain board, every little thing you take apart, pay attention for any wear, for any particular issues that were indicating other things going on. With this drain plug, the magnetic drain plug, we can see there was something going on inside the chain case.
Well, I was a little nervous about some of this that I've been seeing, and as I was taking off this chain case cover, I heard a couple of clicks and a couple little things drop, and then I took a look inside, and you can see that this bearing is it's toast. So it's a really good thing that I'm getting in here now to get this taken care of, because the bearing, as you can see, there's the back part of the bearing there is it's gone. Wow. How about that? Yeah, and there it is. I mean, there's the inner race to the bearing is there. I'm also getting this to show that there's a spacer there to make sure that you use and make sure it goes back in. But you can wiggle the cover out, kind of back and forth and get it out of there. It's not that big of a deal. And you can see in here you got your, your chain tensioner, and you got this seal to the bearing. That's going to come out of there for now. You can see also I took off the O-ring that goes on that shaft. That's your seal. And the other side of this is, this bearing, which is obviously all the components are gone out of it. How about that? All right, so now that you got your chain case cover off, and there's a spacer that goes here that I just took off. 17mm bolt that you can actually access from the footwell to get back at. Crack off that 17mm, you'll loosen up your chain tensioner, and you can slide out this whole bit here. Obviously, and pull out those gears, so now we can get after that bottom drive shaft. Obviously, you take off there's 6 T40s. I'll double check that, 6 T40s. That 3 go into the drive shaft on that triangle, and then 3 go to the outside. You take those out, and then this part is loose, and then the other side, obviously, then is also free to go and move, and so then that will be able to slide out once we're ready to pull the drive shaft. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and loosen up the axle and the adjustment bolts, and get those good and loose to make some room in the skid. Then we're gonna take out the bolts that hold in this rear suspension link, as well as the front of the skid. So there's 4 total bolts, 2 of these, and 2 of these. We'll get those out of the way. Take a look here, obviously, to make sure we got our direction correct on those. So like I said, you can loosen this up, make a little room, that way the skid will come out easier. We'll get that skid out. Once we get the skid out, and this is doing it this way. I mean, I do it this way without rolling it over on its side. Some people roll it over its side. I think that that's also pretty easy, but I like to go ahead and use just an overhead rope to tie the rear end up. Actually, use a ratchet strap, get it up in the air, and then we'll get her out. I needed to go ahead and replace this track, which is becoming a little dangerous. These things come apart at like, honestly, over 100 miles an hour. They come apart. You have no brakes. You have nowhere to stop. So anyhow, I decided to get that out of there. I got a new track to put on. And I'm at the halfway point. I had to take out all kinds of fun stuff in here. Here's a drive shaft there, jack shaft, gears are out. Oh, muffler's off, brakes are out on this side. Secondary clutch is out, and the belt's off, and the skid's out. But hey, it's a great day. Gotta put a brand new track in this thing and get it ready to go. And it's a good thing.
Reassembly is going to be pretty much in reverse order, with a couple little tricks and tips that I'm going to show you here. But obviously, while the skid is out, you're going to check your bogey wheels for wear, check the bearings for wear, grease any that are necessary that are getting kind of dry. You're going to take your jack shaft bearings as well as your drive shaft. You're going to go ahead and pull the back sleeve out of each one of those and repack those. It's a good time to do it now. It's cheap insurance, and just kind of do it on the one side, if you will. On these Polarises, that drive shaft cover has 6 bolts. There is a position that has to be in. There's a down arrow. Make sure you get the down arrow correct. And ultimately, that chain case, you're going to need to tighten that up. There's a little screwdriver trick you use for that. Use a little bit of Loctite on those 6 drive shaft bolts. I'd hate to see them come out. I wouldn't use hard Loctite, otherwise it becomes real complicated to get it away later. You're going to compress that caliper, brake caliper by hand. Slide them back so you can get the brake pads to fit back in. As I mentioned before, that 15 millimeter behind the caliper is a bit tight, but you can use a 3/8 drive and it will work. Just remember, go back and look at your pictures for your alignment spacers. Don't forget those. And look, I had this picture before. I have 2 muffler springs on the top spring because they've come apart on me multiple times on the trail. Those 2 springs work, but getting those springs on, you really need to use either a string or a spring puller tool, or both. If you guys have any additional questions besides these couple of tips coming up, please feel free to comment in the section below. Thank you.
One little trick you're gonna do when you're tightening up your bottom bolt to your bottom of your chain case gear is you need to slide a screwdriver in between this gear and this gear, in the chain, and that'll allow you to tighten it. It'll kind of wedge in there and let you tighten it. Also, I wanted to do one more quick look at this high back. So brand new is all the way down there. We were getting nervous about getting to that first bar of wear. And you can see up here on the curve, we actually went a little bit beyond that. And there was still enough meat in between this. What I would say is between these 2 lines, these top 2 lines, you can see there, between those 2 lines, the midsection, that is probably where you run out of high facts. So whenever you do get to that middle line there, that's about time to change them out.